Early on, when I started getting more into apologetics, one of the questions that was really prevalent in my area was why can't all religions be true? Or why monotheism, not polytheism? And just things like this. But the bigger one was really why can't they all be true? And in short, the issue is when you have these different religions making objective truth claims and they contradict each other, you can't say they both are true because that defies the laws of logic. That's just not how it works. If one's saying, for instance, that Jesus Christ died on the cross, and those saying that he did not die on the cross, well, those are two objective truth claims. The question is which one is true? And if this one's true, then the other one is therefore false. And it would be a false religion because it's built upon a false claim. And so when thinking about the issue of polytheism, one of the arguments that was presented to me and that I've been working through and just kind of thinking through, especially more recently again with on Call to Defend Apologia and Call to Defend when we're talking about Mormonism, this again kind of came to my mind because they do believe in this, not necessarily polytheism the way we think of it, but also this kind of mixture of henotheism, where there are these other gods, but we only worship one of them. Or there's only one who really rules over the world. And it kind of depends on the time period you're looking at and the division of Mormonism that you're looking into or Latter-day Saints. But I'm not here to kind of defend or go against that idea, it's just kind of sharing my thought process. It's just some of the things that are going through my head again. And so the issue with polytheism in general is that when you have the idea what God is, and that there are these like 6 principles, and Caleb has gone over that many times on their other channels, where, for instance, you have to be eternal, you have to not lack anything, you have to be omniscient, you have to be omnipotent, have the ability to be omnipresent, all these kinds of things, where it doesn't mean that you have to always be doing these things, but you have the ability to do these things. And when you consider those issues, when you're talking about beings and there's these differences, or these 2 different beings, for instance, it's just like 2, there has to be something that differentiates them. And so when we're talking about beings, the issue is that there has to be something that one has that the other lacks. The problem is that God cannot be lacking anything, or else he wouldn't be God. And so if one being has something that the other doesn't, and vice versa, then you don't have God. Or you have to say that one being has everything and the other one doesn't have those things, therefore that being is lacking, and therefore that one's God, which means either you have monotheism or you have atheism. So polytheism, kind of depending on how you work with God and which being has what, and if they have it all or if they don't have it all, you run into the issue of, in short, atheism or monotheism, which polytheism therefore doesn't really work. Now, you could ask the question like, okay, what about the other beings? There's other like Elohim in the Bible, but Elohim is used more like a place of residence term in the idea that, when a human dies, their spirit leaves their body and therefore they're considered an Elohim because they're now a member of the spiritual world. You also have other beings that are subject to God or rebellious to God that are also called Elohim. But then it says that Yahweh is the Elohim of Elohim. It kind of treats him like he is the creator God, that he is the one that is the uncreated, but the other ones are created. They're all sourced in him, meaning that he is the one that brings about their life, brings about their existence, and has differentiated them from himself in that they are different beings than he is. They're ontologically different. He is therefore species and ontologically unique. There is none other like him. And therefore, he is the one God because he has all these attributes. Now, I'm not here to really kind of get into all those things, but in considering those things, just the fact that that was on my mind, I thought was really interesting that as I was reading through Athanasius, which for this channel is kind of the point is to go through church history, that I found a very similar and yet different argument that I just thought was kind of interesting. And I just kind of wanted to share some of Athanasius' thoughts regarding polytheism, monotheism, and atheism. And so what he kind of argues for is that to be polytheistic is effectively atheistic. And again, this kind of goes in 2 different ways. So for atheism in that time period especially, you could be an atheist in that you reject the gods that are kind of required of the government. Therefore, if you reject those gods, you're an atheist. You're a rejecter of those gods. And so when he's talking about atheism regarding against Christianity, and you have that being where, especially in the Nicene period, they're saying, we believe in one God, the Father, and then we say that the Son is true God from true God, true light from true light, and then you have the Holy Spirit who is spirating from the Father. you then have the fact that there's these three persons, but they're the one essence. And so he's kind of saying if you reject that, you are therefore an atheist because you're rejecting that. And we're talking about atheism in the idea of rejection of the God that is on the table. But they also have the idea of atheism, meaning that there is no God. And so he's kind of saying that, if you reject the idea that your gods have this, you are therefore atheists because your gods do not have the things required of them to be considered God. And so he kind of gets into this position of saying polytheism is effectively atheism. And I kind of want to share how he gets there very briefly. So if we look at his text against the heathen, we can go to the third part where you look at the first chapter of this section. And a little bit later down the line, he goes on to make this point that God so ordered creation that although he is by nature invisible, he may yet be known by his work. And this is something the Bible even talks about, that you can know about God through his creation. You can look to the heavens, understand him, and that there's things about him that are revealed in the world that is very clear that there is a God, and you can understand more about who or what this God is. And then you have the scriptures to really reveal more of who he is, but also these different divine revelations, especially for the prophets and the priests and the kings, where they got to encounter God in these different points in time, or the apostles, they got to encounter God. But then you also have their followers who were like learning from the prophets, learning from the priests, learning from the kings, learning from the scriptures, and they're getting to understand more of not just what God is, but who God is. So he's going to be building up this case, and I'm going to share a brief version of it, where he's trying to point to the very fact that creation points to the necessity of there being one God, and because these other religions around him are polytheist, he's saying that polytheists are effectively atheists in regards to the both issues, because you're rejecting the one who is actually God, but then you're also rejecting the idea and therefore have gods who do not have those principles that are required to be God. Therefore, they don't believe in one who is truly God. So when we consider his later portion of the text, he's now talking about how creation is ordered in such a way. And so he puts it this way, saying, since then there is everywhere not disorder, but order, proportion and not disproportion, not disarray, but arrangement, that in an order perfectly harmonious we must infer and be led to perceive the master that put together and compacted all things and produced harmony in them. So this is almost like a I guess you could say, fine-tuning argument. He's arguing from a position of order versus disorder. And so he's saying, okay, we know that the world has order to it. Because it has order, there must be one who has brought things to order. So then he's going to get into the question of why one person who brings order and not multiple people who brought order. So he goes on to say that for though he had not seen with his eyes, yet from the order and harmony of things contrary, it is possible to perceive the ruler, arranger, and king. So obviously they're going to argue from a position of there is one ruler. There is one who has brought things together, and he is king because he is the orderer of all these things. He continues on much later to say, for disorder is a sign of absence of rule, while order shews the governing authority. For when we see the mutual harmony of the members in the body, that the eye does not strive with the hearing, nor is the hand at variance with the foot, but that each accomplishes its services without variance, we perceive from this that certainly there is a soul in the body that governs these members, though we see it not. So in the order and harmony of the universe, we must perceive God, the governor of it all, that he is one and not many. And so what he's kind of getting to here is that because the universe is ordered in such a way, and there's consistency in the ordering, and ordering kind of involves a ruler of sort, a king, he's saying that there has to be one who is truly ruling over it all. But he's also one who affirms the idea of creation from nothing, and that the idea that there is one God. Therefore, it's not just that he brought order, but that he brought all things into existence, and he did so with order, and that there isn't disorder in what he has done. And to say that there is disorder is to look at an area where there is lacking of ruling. And so this is just kind of interesting, the way he kind of portrays this idea of what exactly is monotheism. He's kind of more going for an idea that monotheism requires a monarch, a king, and that a king is one, not many. But this king, as we know, has to be the one true God, who also is truly God in the very sense of what it means to be God, because this idea is already kind of in the place for what it means to be God. So if you keep reading what he says, He says later on, for if there were more than one ruler of creation, such an universal order would not be maintained, but all things would fall into confusion because of their plurality, each one biasing the whole to his own will and striving with the other. Okay, so now he's getting to this idea of saying that if we have these multiple beings, that you have multiple gods that are involved in creation, they're going to want to do things according to their will. And, if they're all lacking something, in order to differentiate them, the idea that one has to be distinguished from the other. So the idea, for instance, that you have the sun god, therefore he has something that the moon god does not have. And he's kind of saying, well, look, you have this issue here that they're going to want to do things according to their will and to their kind of like their nature and the very things that are part of who and what they are. And so there would be an inconsistency in that because they're going to, especially if we consider the fact that these other gods and these other religions were very much acting like humans and that they, all wanted to have rulership of some sort, or they were trying to take over. Maybe not all of them, but a large number of them. You see there's a lot in these conflicts. You would kind of expect there to be an issue with the way the world is ordered, in that there wouldn't be really consistency in how things are governed and function. So I think it's kind of interesting. He's going for like a functioning issue regarding why there must be one God who put things together, and really why there must be a God at all, because things are ordered and put together in a way with consistency, as if there was one king who ruled over it. Whereas if there were multiple kings, they're going to want to do things according to their will and their desires. So if we consider a few more things that he says, he goes on to say, for just as we said that polytheism was atheism, so it follows that the rule of more than one is the rule of none. For each one would cancel the rule of the other, and none would appear ruler, but there would be anarchy everywhere. So if we have multiple rulers, then they would cancel each other out, especially if they were in disagreement. The question would be, who truly is the higher God? And if one is higher, why is he higher over the others? And is he higher because of X, Y, Z, or because of A, B, C? And you're just kind of working through this. He's saying that it doesn't make sense for there to be these things because that higher king could also be, kind of just think this through, could also be usurped. And therefore the other one is the higher king. So what makes them the higher king? Just the very fact that they won the argument, or something else? Because what if the other one kind of comes in? Or what if they're in lock with each other and therefore they're in disagreement on this? There has to be one who's truly ruler and governing over all things. And therefore all things must be under him and him alone. So if we keep going, we go to the next section where he talks about the impossibility of a plurality of gods, meaning there cannot be multiple deities. And so he goes to say that for if there were a plurality of gods, there would necessarily be also more universes than one, for neither were it reasonable for more than one God to make a single universe, nor for the one universe to be made by more than one, because of the absurdities which result from this. Firstly, if the one universe were made by a plurality of gods, that would mean weakness on the part of those who made it, because many contribute to a single result. And I think that's really interesting when he says that many would contribute to a single result, in that the other gods, think about like the Greek gods, for instance, they depend on each other to create, because Zeus has certain power that the other gods do not have, and the other gods have certain power that Zeus does not have. And the same is true of the Egyptian gods, the Babylonian gods, and all these things, where they are different beings that each have these powers and abilities that the other one doesn't have. And it comes from what they are. And even if we just kind of ignored the different powers and things that they have, we just considered the fact that they're, again, differentiated, because in order to be different beings, there has to be something that one has that the other lacks, and therefore vice versa. He's saying that if they're dependent on each other to create because they don't have enough power to create, they're not truly God, and therefore you would have either multiple universes or one really inconsistent, sloppy, weak universe. But he's arguing that we see that there is, from my understanding, there is one universe, and it is ordered in such a way that it points to the very idea and fact that there has to be one who is truly ruler and God over all things. After all, he then goes on to say, for if one were sufficient, that many would not supplement each other's deficiency, but to say that there is any deficiency in God is not only impious, but even beyond all sacrilege. For even among men, one would not call a workman perfect if he were unable to finish his work a single piece by himself. and without the aid of several others. We cannot say that the worker is perfect if he is dependent upon another being to aid in his creation. I think that's really interesting. The being that is lacking something that the other one is not lacking, but that one's also lacking something that the other one is not lacking. This whole back and forth. You have one that you cannot say that they are the perfect maker. And you're saying that that's a sacrilegious idea. The idea to say that God is lacking something in order to bring about his creation is ridiculously heretical and awful to say such a thing. And I think that's just really important to kind of note that this plays into the issue of polytheism and why he's arguing for such a thing regarding monotheism. And therefore, that's why he's saying that polytheism is effectively atheism, because the gods that you worship are not truly God. They lack something, and therefore they are weak and not truly God, even if they are powerful beings. And yet, there is one God within the Christian world that has all that power, that has the ability to do things himself. I think that's really just kind of fascinating. So let's just keep going with his argument. He goes later on to say that in this you must know that if the universe had been made by a plurality of gods, its movements would be diverse and inconsistent, for having regard to each one of its makers, its movements would be correspondingly different, but such different again, as was said before, would involve disarray and general disorder, for not even a ship would sail aright if she be steered by many, unless one pilot hold the tiller. So now again, he's getting to this idea of, is not just the idea of having the power to create, but the ability to rule over all things. He's talking about from a perspective of order as well, not just power, but order. And if you have multiple beings who are overseeing the order, then you do not have one who is truly over it. And then you could argue, sure, well, what if you have one who's ruler but he delegates other things? But that's different because they're subject to him still. And he's pointing out, saying that there's several other arguments being made that there are areas where the high God does not have authority, or does not truly have the same kind of authority or power in regards to his sovereignty that the other ones have. Versus like the biblical God, who has the sovereignty, and yes, he's delegated things, but they are still subject to him. Even in the rebellion, they still answer to him, and that he will judge them. This is kind of the same thing with Psalm 82, where he chastises the other Elohim that are ruling over the other nations, and he's saying, you're not supposed to be doing these kinds of things. You answer to me, I will judge you. And you're therefore pointing out that their authority is under his authority, that he's one who truly has the ultimate authority, even if he's delegating roles and tasks, that they still answer to him. But for Athanasius, he's seen that these other gods in these other religions, that they have authority and power that the one who may be in charge in some way does not have. And therefore, you can see that there is disorder within that, because there is a disconnect with how everything is working. So he then kind of continues to go on to say, creation then being one and the universe one and its order one, we must perceive that its king and artificer also is one. For this is why the artificer himself made the whole universe one, lest by the coexistence of more than one a plurality of makers should be supposed, but that as the work is one, its maker also may believe to be one. So because there is one world, one universe, and there is one way that the world works, and there's order to it, there must be one who rules over that and has provided such order, provided such structure, and that even if there were other beings delegated tasks, they still answer to him. And so I think this is just really interesting when we consider the simplicity of his argument, in that the idea that there is order, that there is structure to the world, and just the way that the world works. I'm not just talking about from a government standpoint, but just kind of look at the world around you, that there is a structure and a system. The fact that the sun comes up at a certain time, the moon goes down, the idea that stars show up at certain times, the idea that there's a water cycle, the idea that there is a food cycle or a circle of life, and all these things, that there is such order, points to the fact that there has to be one who is over the order and therefore is the king and is guiding that order. And that if there were multiple ones in order, it would appear to be in disarray and not in order. Now, he's not getting to the idea that you can't have rebellious agents within the order, but he's saying there's the fact that the world around you, just from his natural standpoint, or that there's order, there's a structure to it, seems to imply that there must be one who's over it. And again, he's talking about a time period where there isn't this idea of atheism in the way that we think about atheism in this truest sense, but he is saying that in his argument against the polytheists. And I think it's just interesting regarding early apologetics that he's saying that polytheists are effectively atheists for two reasons. One, they reject who truly is the monarch, who truly is the one who has all the power and authority. And so, in regards to atheism, like when Socrates is called an atheist because he rejects the gods that he's being on trial for not submitting to, he rejects those gods, he's called an atheist because he rejects those gods. And so, here, the idea of rejecting the one true God of the Christian Bible for him is saying that you are effectively an atheist. But then you also have the idea that because if we go with these polytheistic idea, that if there are these other multiple beings and they're all in charge of something, they're all ruling, and there's not truly one who has, one, all the principles, and two, is not truly the one in charge. And the question is, why is he in charge? That's a really important question. Why is he in charge? And if you don't have that, then you are effectively an atheist because you do not have one who is truly God. And so I just think it's really interesting. I'm not trying to argue whether or not this is a true argument or false argument. I just think it's a really interesting argument that he makes regarding early apologetics within this time period. And so he would be a Nicene father. He's around the time of the Nicene Creed, and he's arguing against Arius and other texts and regarding the question of Arianism itself, of which we'll do another video at some point. But I just wanted to kind of consider these ancient arguments that do they still hold up today? And just kind of thinking through these things. How do we understand the world around us? Do we just kind of think simply that do we just kind of like just accept things without really thinking about it? Or do we kind of think through the simplicity of the world around it and the very fact that things we take for granted points to the very fact that there is a God? The very fact that there's one who put things in order. The fact that there is an order to the world means there must be one who ordered it in such a way and that he rules over it in such a way. And I think that's really interesting. It's almost like a proto fine-tuning argument. And I think it's just kind of interesting and one that I just kind of want us to kind of just share and just kind of sit through and chew on. Because I just think it is one that can kind of help us to just recognize the beauty of the world that is around us. And so I really hope that you guys are challenged and are encouraged by this idea and this argument that Athanasius brings. And I encourage you to go check out the rest of Against Heathen, as it's a great document and has a lot of really interesting arguments and points that he makes throughout the entirety of it against these other teachings that are out there, and that he's trying to show that here's what they are, here's what they believe to be, but here's why they can't be true. And here's why come home to the truth of Christianity. And I think it's just fascinating. And so I hope you guys go check that out. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you were blessed by this. Please like, comment, subscribe, join the Discord. Let us know what you kind of thought about this. And we hope to see you guys in the next video.